I'm Edie Lush, and I'm here inside the Hub Culture studio in Davos, 2019. Really pleased to be joined by Gregory Hodkinson, Chairman of ARUP. Thanks for coming along.
Pleasure to be here.
One of the things that I've been focusing on this week is urbanization. The world is more than half living in cities, and that is a trend that's only going to continue. We know that to be true. ARUP, very involved in not only buildings, but really thinking about the circular economy within a city. So I wonder if you could tell me something that you've been talking about this week that you found real resonance.
Yeah, well, thanks, Edie. I've got two roles here at WEF. One is chairing the initiative on the future of urban development, and we've had lots of stakeholders engaged in that discussion this week. And the second is co-chairing the infrastructure community at the WEF, and the demand for infrastructure to support urban development is massive. So not only more than half of us live in cities, we all know that now, but by 2040 the number of people living in cities is going to increase by another half, so 50% more. It's a massive problem in the sense that there's insufficient pace in the delivery of infrastructure to support that urban development, and the pace needs to step up. But more importantly, and you mentioned circular economy, more importantly, it has to be the right kind of infrastructure and the right kind of urban development, because if it isn't, we'll lock in an unsustainable mode of urban living for the next generation. When you build a city, you've got one chance at it. You can come back afterwards, perhaps, and retrofit it. That's awfully painful, awfully slow, awfully expensive, and won't result in a sustainable outcome.
I love that you just said that. I was in India over Christmas and New Year, and was in Bombay and watching and reading and speaking to people about the development of the metro. And it is a perfect example of what you just said there. Retrofitting a city, which is enormous and has so many different complexities. Building that metro system has involved the richest, the poorest. Every single religion, I think, has been at one point against it. It's harder.
Yes, very difficult. And you don't have to go to the developing world. I mean, look at Los Angeles. So, you know, the cities in the world that developed in the age of the automobile, because they could, you know, created a problem for themselves that's very difficult to go back and do something about. You know, in a relatively low density city like Los Angeles, it's very difficult. I mean, obviously they're trying and there are various initiatives underway, but it's very difficult to retrofit sustainable transport systems to move around the volume of people you need to efficiently. And that situation's only multiplied many times over in the rapidly developing parts of the world, where population growth is demanding solutions today and tomorrow.
So tell me about where you think an example, when a city's starting from scratch, where it could be going quite well.
Yeah, well, there are not that many cities starting from scratch. You know, this 2 billion people over the next 20 years that we're expecting to see in cities, more than half of them are going to come into existing cities, which are just going to get bigger. But there are some from scratch. I think the most notable examples are in Asia, and particularly in China. And we all know the stories about how Chinese cities have grown up. The Chinese government right now is sponsoring a project for a new city called Zhong'an, which is 50 kilometers or so south of Beijing, which is being planned to be on a much more circular basis to result in a more sustainable urban outcome, so that you know, the relationship between land use and transport and where people live, where people work, where food is sourced from, and so on, is much more sustainable. And I think the Chinese are very advanced in circular thinking. You know, they've had a long-standing philosophical position about living with nature, and they're trying to reintroduce that into modern Chinese society at a time when, and again, we all have heard about the problems of urbanization in China. So I think in China, that example, and it's a large one, I think in stage one they're looking for 5 million people to live there, so it's not small. Size of Boston,
right?
Not small. But it'll be very interesting to see. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of time for too many case studies.
Right.
You know, you build what we need to build, certainly by the middle of this century, then population growth levels off, and we're stuck with what we have.
Right. Do you think it's being done at enough of a systemic level?
No, it isn't. You know, cities are systems of systems, and trying to find a systemic approach is occupying quite a lot of discussion here at Davos this week, but it remains fairly difficult to pin down, and that is because nations find agreement on even fairly straightforward things difficult, and when you come down to city level, there are so many stakeholders and actors that getting
the government of the national government, the state government, the regional,
and not to mention the population. I mean,
Right.
we've seen urban populations rejecting certain outcomes. The issues that we're seeing in France at the moment, which relate to ironically enough, a sort of carbon tax to
Right.
to provide a more sustainable outcome. In this case, in terms of climate change. The people are not happy with, and there's a lack of political leadership generally to be able to explain to the populace and bring people along on what is actually needed to be done. So, like many things, leadership, and in this case, political leadership, is absolutely required.
Gregory, thank you very much for stopping by the Hub Culture studio
Pleasure.
here in Davos, and I'm Edie Lush.